Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video, I like to talk about the imminent threat to British factories as a result of the current energy crisis. Another global issue in many ways, as the Brexiteers like to put it, but one that is only affecting Britain in such a critical way. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So manufacturing had already been hit last year with the coronavirus pandemic, and now another threat looms due to the energy crisis. I talked the other day, maybe yesterday, maybe the day before, about the threats to the production of, say, toilet paper and food packaging. Well, the same issues are going to affect factories across the country. A meeting was held with the business secretary, Kwasi Kwarteng, and it was reported that all sectors said that there was a serious risk of production having to completely stop. Now, there are a couple of issues at work here. The first one, the biggest one, is that business rates on energy are not capped like they are with domestic rates. Yes, sure, domestic rate caps can rise as they just have done, causing a lot of problems for a lot of people that were already struggling, and they're going to again next April. But they are fixed for that sort of duration. So people know their domestic supply, if it's capped, that newly raised cap now remains in place until April, and at which time it'll go up again. Businesses have to pay whatever a going rate is. And as that going rate rises, some factories are going to find themselves in the position of not being able to continue production and make it financially viable. So production will just stop. The second issue is that in the event of not being able to meet demand for electricity, if there's a certain squeeze, then there are priorities. Domestic supplies are prioritised over manufacturing supplies. And maybe that's because it's more politically damaging for the government to have homes without electricity than a factory. I don't know. It might be a more practical reason. But the bottom line is that factories could just find themselves with blackouts as supplies are threatened as we head into winter. Now, each isolated example of a factory shutting down production obviously represents a loss to the British economy, as well as worries for the factory workers there, their local economy, that the people won't be earning enough to be able to spend as much on local goods and services. But on a larger scale, we already have serious shortages in our supply chain. This will just create more of them. And we can't just keep importing more of what we aren't already producing ourselves. That's the government's answer to everything. Oh, we'll just import more. The problem is, there's three problems really. First, if we reduce our own manufacturing base and increase imports to compensate, we just tip the balance of trade further away from our advantage. On a large scale and over a sustained period of time, absolutely crushing to the strength of our economy, to say nothing of the problems with unemployment. Secondly, many of these imports will have to come from the EU. The more reliant we become on EU imports, the weaker our hand in the trade war that the government seem to be dead set upon. And if and when that trade war hits, our shortages will become more acute. And even for imports from outside the EU, well, I was just talking recently about the crisis we've got at container ports. We already cannot cope with the level of imports that we're having to manage. And then finally, can't just keep importing more anyway, because we've got a shortage of lorry drivers. You may have heard about it. We already struggle to distribute what we've got coming into the country. We already trying to distribute what we've got in the country. We cannot afford to increase this further. And these problems are happening now. They're going to hit crisis point in the run-up to Christmas, the time of year of rising demand for both the production and distribution of goods. The idea of production actually having to stop at this time will be very impactful. So what are the government doing about it? Well, according to the government themselves, not a lot. The business secretary had suggested that he was in talks with the Treasury over options. However, the Treasury denied this. And actually, it's a bit of a row, because they've even gone as far as to say that Kwarteng was lying and that it's not the first time he'd done so. A little scallywag. Well, with Boris Johnson also buggering off on yet another holiday in the middle of a crisis that he is largely responsible for, Labour were quick to point at the dysfunctional government operation at work here. In fact, as a little aside, if you want to know how serious this is, You could take a look at a paragraph from a piece in the Financial Times as it opens up with a new article. And the Financial Times is a very serious paper. It lobbies for the people who basically own the country and everyone in it. It's not given to flights of fancy like the tabloids. But listen to this. And this is a Tory supporting newspaper. Boris Johnson has urged Tory MPs to hold their nerve as fears over supply shortages rise up the political agenda and ministers worry that the party may run short of excuses by Christmas. Several top party figures have been spotted panic-buying explanations, while others were seen queuing for hours amid reports of emergency supplies of mitigation. That is the sort of sarky comment you might expect from me, not a serious broadsheet. You get the impression that people are giving up on any notion that they may once have held that the government will actually govern. You know, the nation is beset by crises that just pile on top of one another because nobody's dealing with them. It's like a leak in a boat, isn't it? Boat's taking on water and there's no one trying to bail out the water to keep on top of things. The government's just sat there watching the water come in without any attempts to either plug the hole or pump out the rising water. The government keep trying to pretend that these are global issues that are affecting everyone the same. They're not. They are not affecting anyone the same, in fact. But even if they were, we would still expect the government to do something. But excuses is all they have. That and the belief that the excuses will be enough. You know, that things can get a whole lot worse, because they're going to. And people will grumble, sure, yeah, but just put up with it. After all, it's not like anyone else would do any better, they'll tell themselves. But in amongst the squabbling between ministers and their boss out of the country, sunning himself in Marbella, manufacturers are looking ahead to a storm coming their way from which there is little they can do without government intervention. You know, they are warning that this will hurt investment even more if we not only have reduced access to our nearest market, but unreliable operating conditions in Britain. Who is going to want to build a factory in Britain if it cannot even maintain steady energy prices or even guarantee supplies of energy at all, at any price? And the fact that there is talk about energy bills increasing again next year, next April, that means there is no suggestion that this is a little blip, that this is just a short-term crisis. Otherwise, why would you be talking about needing to raise them again in April? It's going to carry on into next year at least. And at this point, I feel I have to remind everyone of what Professor Patrick Minford said. He's the economist that the Conservatives have listened to very carefully right back to Thatcher. You will have to run manufacturing down, is what he told senior members of the government at the time Brexit was becoming policy. His exact words in an article he wrote were, "Over time, if we left the EU, it seems likely that we would mostly eliminate manufacturing, leaving mainly industries such as design, marketing and high tech. This shouldn't scare us." Oh, really? And even though he said this while Boris Johnson was Mayor of London, you can see that he also bought into it. He constantly talks about Britain's high-tech manufacturing future. He's not doing anything to encourage it or make it happen, mind you. No legislation, regulations or public spending are being used to make it a reality. But it's what he talks about all the time. And when even those behind Brexit said that it would be in the government's interest to just let manufacturing in Britain die out, you can see why it is that the government are doing just that. As far as they're concerned, they've been told by a professor of economics that this is what they should do. So if any factory owner in this country thinks that the government is going to do anything at all to help them through the crisis, when they have been told that actually it's in the government's interest to let them collapse, they haven't been paying attention. But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. If you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.